I was just minding my own business when she sat down next to me, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the tray table as she settled in. I didn't think much of it at first. I had just boarded my flight, found my seat, and was preparing to relax for the next few hours. But then she started talking. "Excuse me," she said, her voice using that unmistakable condescension. "I ordered the chicken, but it looks a little dry. I'm sure you wouldn't mind swapping, right? I'll take the beef. Yours looks way better." I froze for a second. I had no idea what she was talking about. I looked down at my tray. The beef. I wasn't even sure what it was, but I wasn't about to give up my meal. It didn't even cross my mind until she spoke, but there she was, staring at me with that look half-smile. Eyes narrowed in a way that made it seem like she expected me to just hand over my food. Before I could react, the flight attendant appeared at my side. She was tall, with a no-nonsense expression on her face, her uniform sharp and clean. I could already tell this was not going to be the usual, polite "Hi, how are you today?" kind of interaction. "Excuse me, miss," the Karen repeated, now raising her voice just enough to draw some attention. "I'd like to swap my meal for hers. I mean, this chicken is basically inedible. Yours looks much more appetizing." The flight attendant looked from Karen to me, sizing up the situation with a calm professionalism. She knew exactly what was going on. "Mom, I'm afraid that's not possible. We can't do any meal swaps mid-flight. The meals are assigned based on preferences and orders." I couldn't help but smile a little, relieved that the flight attendant was handling this with such grace. But Karen wasn't having it. She sat up straighter, and her tone became sharper, almost dramatic. "Do you not understand who I am? This is completely unacceptable. I paid for a first-class experience, and I'm entitled to get what I want." My stomach sank a little. I'd seen people like this before, entitled, rude, and used to getting their way. And now, I was going to have to deal with it. The whole thing had become an awkward standoff. The flight attendant wasn't backing down, though. "I'm sorry, but our policy is clear. We can't allow any changes to your meal at this point. You'll have to stick with what you've got." Karen's face turned red. The sort of red that told me she was fuming, but also that she knew she wasn't going to win this one. She leaned forward and spoke with a dangerous calm. "Look, sweetheart, I've been flying first class for years. This is the worst experience I've ever had. I'm going to write a complaint about you, and you'll lose your job. You've just lost a loyal customer." There was a brief silence, and I thought for sure she was going to escalate the situation further. But to my surprise, the flight attendant didn't flinch. She simply smiled, almost like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Mom, if you'd like to submit a complaint, you can do so when we land. But I assure you, my job is not in jeopardy for following company policy." I was shocked at how calm and collected she was. If it were me, I probably would have been ready to just give in or get angry, but she just kept her composure. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't just about food. This was about someone trying to assert their power over another person just because they felt like they could. And Karen wasn't done. "You're really going to make me eat this slop?" she scoffed, pushing her tray away as if it were the worst thing in the world. "That's it. I'm going to complain to the airline. I'm going to make sure they hear about you. You'll see." The flight attendant, still smiling, leaned in a little closer. "You're welcome to try, ma'am, but I'm sure they'll find my actions perfectly acceptable." For a moment, Karen just sat there, staring at the flight attendant as if she was weighing her options. I could see her thinking about making one last push for the meal, but she couldn't seem to decide whether it was worth it. And then, as if the whole world had tilted for a second, Karen glanced at me one more time. And I'm pretty sure she was hoping I'd cave in and hand over my meal. I think she really believed that I would, but I didn't. I hadn't ordered the beef meal by mistake. I was happy with my meal. It wasn't amazing, but it was fine. And I wasn't about to give up my food to someone who couldn't handle a little disappointment. So, I did something unexpected. I smiled, turned to the flight attendant, and said, "Thank you so much. I appreciate you handling this situation so calmly." It was a small gesture, but it was enough to break the tension. The flight attendant glanced at me, a brief flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "Of course. Thank you for your understanding." Meanwhile, Karen's face was priceless. Her eyes widened as if she couldn't believe that I wasn't giving in. She shook her head, muttered something under her breath, and pulled her tray back towards her. But it was clear she wasn't done. She wasn't going to let it go. She sat there, visibly upset, and continued to grumble under her breath. But at that point, there was nothing more she could do. The flight attendant walked away with a sense of quiet victory. And as she did, she passed a glance my way. I gave her a nod of thanks. She'd done more than just protect company policy. She'd stood up to someone who thought they could push others around just because they felt entitled. And I had a feeling this wasn't the first time she'd handled a Karen like that. I sat back in my seat and tried to relax. The rest of the flight went by without incident, and I couldn't help but feel a little proud of how the situation turned out. I wasn't about to let anyone, especially someone like Karen, bully me out of my meal. But what really struck me was how often these situations happen, people believing that their status or wealth entitles them to special treatment, thinking they can just take what they want from others. And, for a moment, I felt grateful that I didn't let it slide, that I didn't give in to her pressure. When the flight landed, I could tell Karen was still fuming. She stood up first, not even glancing back at me or the flight attendant. But as we deplaned, I overheard her talking to someone else about how unprofessional the flight attendant had been. The last thing I saw was the flight attendant calm, collected, and proud of what she'd done. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that sometimes standing up to the small stuff like a flight meal can make a huge difference in how we deal with the bigger challenges in life. It's about asserting your boundaries, standing up for what's right, and never letting anyone push you around, no matter how loud they get. It wasn't just about the food. It was about respecting each other, even when it's hard. And sometimes, that's enough to change the whole course of a situation.